Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Hello again. Welcome back to our Saturday talks on the Maha Satipatthana Sutta. I hope everybody is well. We've been doing this now. This will be week 4, and last week I slowed down, so some of what we'd originally kind of laid out for schedule is slowing it down even further, because these topics we're looking at get pretty profound and complicated, and in a lot of ways the Maha Satipatthana Sutta is kind of like the Buddha coming to a group of engineers and say, "Come, engineers, and I will teach you how to be engineers." Now we'll start with 1 + 1 = 2, and that's watching the breath. But eventually he gets to, here's how you solve partial differential equations. And somehow we get all of that knowledge jammed into a short space. And he's doing it by showing us just one step at a time. But so many times we glance over it all without really looking at the kind of rabbit hole that these teachings are deeply. So we kind of get a superficial feeling for it, and then we move on. But this, as we've been practicing it, I really could just, we could keep going and going and going on each topic, but by slowing it down, I think we're all experiencing some benefit. And so with that, just kind of a quick recap, we started with looking at mindfulness of in and out breathing, anapanasati. We looked at the body, we examined the body, and we moved on to last week where we started to consider parts of our mind in looking at our feelings. And so by feelings, we looked at how we can identify when we're just simply having a painful feeling or a pleasant feeling or a neutral feeling. And so as you see, as we're walking through this, it is giving us these frames of reference or these foundations of mindfulness to stop and be mindful of what's actually happening in these realms. And so we're, again, doing that together as a group, walking through this. I'm not an authority of any kind. I'm just another practitioner. And to that end, I'd kind of like, Vicky shared a story this week in morning meditation. And I wonder, Vicky, if you would be willing to share that to kick us off. Are you down for that?
Yeah, kind of. When I told you, you suggested, or you'd asked if I might tell this today. And so I thought I'd write it because it makes more sense sometimes in the way I speak.
Oh.
And I didn't really end up writing it. I wrote more of an outline of the points, I guess, and I can share that with you. My insight on the stairs is what I've titled it so far. Things that bring us insights. That's interesting too. That's a whole nother, but anyway, what happened for me was this winter, I changed my walking path, where before and during the summer, I often walk in my room here. I have a fairly large size room and a deck outside and sliding doors and stuff. So I was opening the door and I would walk outside as well as back in and note those things. Well, winter came on and that route is far too cold. Like for today, there's 8 inches of snow out there on the deck. So I started walking downstairs, which downstairs is just it's a tri-level house. And there are 8 steps from my level down to the next level, which is kind of an open setting, gathering room, the dining room, kitchen, living room, fires down there. That sometimes brings me down because I'm going to throw a log in the fire while I'm walking. Anyway, I started doing that, and I realized in the beginning what I would do was walk to the top of the stairs and grab the rail and hurry down. And then stop and like begin again. And that went on for a while. And then I realized that, these are just stairs. And like we pointed out when we were talking the other day, it was a fear of falling kind of thing without even recognizing it. I think that was just automatic, grab the railing kind of thing. So I decided to see if I could take the steps slowly, as if I were still in my rhythm and kind of in walking. And it wasn't easy in the beginning. I was quite wobbly, and the railing was there if I needed it. And I started out with like one step, the right foot up on the stairs, and then left foot joined it on the same stair. It was easier, or I could do it, put it that way. And right step, and then up on the stairs. And then I go, can I do this one step at a time, each foot? And I eventually could, sometimes pretty wobbly. And I learned also that either barefoot or stocking feet kept me more balanced. That was interesting than if I was wearing my shoes, which I do around the house often in the wintertime. We have a cool house heated by a wood stove kind of thing, Well, then as I slowed down and went to one foot at a time and used a lot of mindfulness, very specific. Here's my toe, here's the rest of my foot, kind of thing, but on the stairs, not on the walking path. And eventually I found myself going up and down those stairs without using the railing. And that for a while there, that felt good. Like, oh, I can do this, which is a good thing. But I realized there was a whole lot of, all of a sudden I went, aha, this is how I can approach other challenges in life, and can apply it to other things. I could see from the practice how to bring it in. And one is the lesson of one step at a time.
Nice.
One is the intention too, because I would in the beginning especially stop and think about it mindfully, gonna step up, it was the intention also that was real important, I realized. But that's a way to approach life. Especially in some instances, the one step at a time, with intention and with mindfulness. And it was a nice aha for me. And it's almost like one of those ahas that you go, well, no, duh. We've been taught that in many ways, not just in this practice, but there are experts who tell you how to break down. Those of you that are engineer types, you know what I mean by the breaking down and the outline and all that stuff. And it was a nice aha for me, the one step at a time. And I also kind of adapted at that time, thinking more about, it sounds maybe silly, but Weebles. I don't know if you know what the toy Weeble is. It wobbles. The phrase applied to it is it wobbles, but doesn't fall down.
They're like
So,
little egg-shaped action figures, right?
Yes, actually, I have one.
Yep, there you go. That's
Yep.
a Weeble. There you go.
That's a Weeble. It doesn't fall down. It just rock and rolls and kind of comes to a stillness. But yeah, also I realized that it's never still either, just like we aren't, and the earth isn't, and all of that. That there's constant that going on. So that was another way to kind of look at it that was helpful for me. And I've also I also kind of talked to the railing a bit along the way and realized that the railing was always there. And then I kind of thought about that for a while and associated that in some ways to our teachings, that the rail's always there and that wobbling is okay. And the rail, though, kind of represented in my thoughts at that time, or still, that the teachers, the Dharma, the Sangha, our group, it's always there. Like the breath is always there. Yeah. And that was what the railing kind of stood for. Anyway, that's kind of the story. As I continue on, I try a few different things with changing routes and stuff, but that's just, I think, to keep my mind more focused sometimes. It helps to change a route and think about it rather than that kind of automatic back and forth in a room sort of thing, for me anyway, because that was getting kind of automatic and my mind was going elsewhere. But if you watched me, I was doing the walking meditation, you know, but sometimes that happens. So the route change is also a lesson too, or the path change, or the trying something different, or all of that Pete, you've talked to me about at times and given me clues of different things to try and whatnot. So like you're always there, like the railing is always there, the teaching is always there. And that was a, kind of a really wonderful way to go, oh, this does apply to my life. Now, I think I've shared with you before that beginning a couple years ago when I started with more Zen that I had done occasionally before that, and until now, there's some medical stuff that supports that. My blood pressure is consistently way lower than it's been in years. So that, the white coats can support that there's something happening there. I'm also more steady on my feet. And that has to do with, I think, some fears about my aging. And I try to call it not aging so much anymore as changing. I'm changing and note it. Yeah. And that balance thing is a piece of that. Which is not to say I'll have balance the rest of my life or more changes aren't going to happen, but I realized how much that made a difference. And my balance is good. And it reminded me of, post-surgery, they give you these walk upstairs and downstairs and the physical therapist. And I go, oh, I could do that just fine. They even let you use a railing, So yeah, I don't know. I could yak about it for a long time, but that's the basic of what I've felt that I've learned through this part of the practice.
Thank you for sharing that. That's a lot of insights there. And if I'm kind of saying, if we come back to the suttas where you can see that by slowing down and becoming mindful of first your breathing and then your postures, which was part of what we looked at in the physical section, what your body's doing, how it's aging, and all those experiences, slowing it down, you began to identify what we looked at last week was this is pleasant and unpleasant or neutral. And when you came across an unpleasant sense on the stairs, it made your Vipassana just laser focused. And all of a sudden, insight arose. And with every step, and with variations, the insights continued because your Vipassana was strong. And so the foundations of mindfulness have served you well. And it's given you a place to look and see what's going on. And you've backed off from the finite and started to see bigger things. Like you say, I'm aging, I'm changing, And once we have that, once we've gained insight and it becomes wisdom, then the rules you're using for the game change. It's kind of like what we learn is that we've been playing Monopoly with the rules to risk this whole time. And so it hasn't quite made sense. Nothing quite clicked. I thought when I got a property and put stuff on it, I needed to attack my neighbor. There's that. It's kind of like that. And so then your wisdom grows and you realize, oh, no, this game's played this other way instead. And so I want to continue with where we are in the sutta and pick up right from there. But I think that's a great place to start. Here as a group, not just one guy talking, we're examining this together. You're examining this where you are. And as you do, your Vipassana sharpens, your wisdom grows. And this is, and I'm constantly just really intrigued when I'm walking through with other practitioners. I mean, it's one thing to kind of practice and see changes in what you're experiencing, but to see how these teachings, when laid out so concisely, examined, really unlock stuff for other people, not just me, not just, but really just functions, I'm always just enamored with that. But let's pick up with our sutta and take a look at this. It's a small section this week with lots of stuff. And how does a monk remain focused on the mind in and of itself? Now, before I go much further, I want to go with the translation. The word in Pali is chitta. It's translated here as mind. It can also be translated as consciousness. So sometimes our translations don't work great. And one of the things we're going to look at today is these Pali terms that are a little more spectrum oriented. But consciousness or mind, how does a monk remain focused on the mind in and of itself? There's the case where a monk, when the mind has passion, discerns that the mind has passion. When the mind is without passion, he discerns the mind is without passion. I'll stop there to say passion, the Pali term is rāga, and it means passion or lust or craving or want or desire. And I actually want to stop with each one of these and explain them as we go, because to simply say passion when we glance over these, or like other translations say lust, you can very quickly become caught in what you think this means. That we're talking about like sexual or sensual lust, or sexual or sensual passion. But this term, rāga, is more nuanced. It can simply be as much as I really wanted that Starbucks on my way to work and I didn't get it, but I passionately wanted that Starbucks. I was craving that Starbucks. It can be as simple as that. It can be heroin. I need heroin to make myself feel normal again, if you're an addict. And so that is a good example of how many things we might be addicted to with passion. Here he says, when you're having a sense of passion, craving, want, or desire. And you discern also when your mind is without passion, craving, want, or desire. When the mind has aversion, he discerns that the mind has aversion. When the mind is without aversion, he discerns that the mind is without aversion. This term, pronounced dosa or devasha, is aversion or anger. And most commonly, I see it translated as anger. Now, let's think about that for a second. Anger is such a hot emotion. And when you have anger, you know it, but you're not feeling any sense of control of it. And so aversion, on the other hand of that spectrum, I simply don't want to go out in the cold wind and rain, is a very far side of that spectrum. And yet it's something that we sense we don't want. And when you're angry, you really don't want whatever to be happening, and you become fight or flight, heavy on the fight often. So this term, dosa, aversion or anger, we're aware when our mind is full of aversion or anger. When the mind has delusion, he discerns that the mind has delusion. When the mind is without delusion, he discerns that the mind is without delusion. The term in Pali for delusion is moha, and it can mean delusion or confusion, kind of a different kind of spectrum. But when you think about it, there's the element of like, I thought I was using the right rules for the game when I was using the wrong rules for the game. That's a good example of moha and delusion. Also, moha and delusion can be, well, I'm not really going to worry about my death because it'll get here one day, but I don't really need to think about it. Like that too can be a delusion. We can have delusion just simply be, boy, I won't be happy unless this other thing that I am craving is true. So it can go hand in hand with craving. And delusion can also go hand in hand with anger or dosa, because you can be have a mind that is deluded, and thus you are angry. Oh, I can't believe they sent me that text that said that. That was so mean, when it was just a misunderstanding of the wording in the text. Those things are all subtle experiences of mind that we all have. Rāga, dosa, and moha. And here, his instruction does not say, you don't ever have a mind that's angry. You don't ever have a mind that's deluded. He says, you know when your mind is angry, you know when it's deluded. So you're looking, you're mindful of it, and you're conscious of it. For now, I just want to stop there and see if anybody's got any thoughts or questions about that section. Chris.
So one of the interesting things is I was thinking about the word passion. I mean, you did a great job of delineating the Pali term, but it's also interesting to note the how the term comes to us in English, because passion we relate to as like this idea of, you know, this overwhelming desire, but in fact it's derived from this Greek word peskeo, which is about being at the mercy of something. Right.
Say that again.
So Pascao is about being at the mercy of something. It's one of the reasons why in Christianity there's this idea, the concept of the passion of the Christ, right? It's not like Christ is sitting here like just like lusting crazily. He's suffering intensely because he's not, you know, there's nothing he can do about it, right? And so the interesting piece is we see it as this sort of overwhelming thing that controls our behavior and pulls us away from ourselves towards something, right? But interestingly enough, it's like they use passion, or to translate the term as passion, really kind of probably is closer to the meaning of the Pali term than we would suspect.
That's interesting. That is, and it's true, because when you really reflect on, when you really look at those things, let it be a love affair, or you know, just a vacation that you really wanted to go on, or any of those things, when you reflect on those, and if you really look, then the entire experience from start to finish is usually just craving. Like, I would like it to go this way, I hope it goes that way, continue to hope it goes that way, gee, I hope it doesn't ever
Pure
end
suffering.
this way. Yeah, no,
mercy something.
And none of that is really, that it certainly isn't unattached. So I'm going to share, I want to go back. Oh, I'm sorry. Has anybody else got anything else that they want to add? That was great, Chris. Thanks for adding. Anybody else got a thought on these passion, aversion, anger, and confusion or delusion that they question on? I'm going to continue to share. So these three things are, we commonly call in Buddhism, the three poisons: rāga, dosa, moha. And if you think of them in terms of those poisons, again, it's like you're at its mercy. You drank that poison, now it's in you. Now it exists, you know that it exists, and you see how you can suffer from it. And we've raised our mindfulness to look directly at that. And again, since it's a spectrum, developing our insight carefully, we can see how it's like something that just doesn't even seem like that big of a deal. The smallest just suggestion of anger existing in an email that you sent to somebody that you work with that you were upset with, or delusion and confusion. Let's talk about that a little bit. Imagine, for example, maybe you had a job that you really liked, and it was going okay, but you didn't feel like it was just exactly right for you. So you had to stop. And so you quit that job, and it left you in a place of not knowing. And you found yourself just unsure if you'd made the right choice. That might leave you in a place where you had a sense of delusion and confusion, where you just weren't sure for a space. And it kind of becomes a good example too, because those things shift in time, right? So as your career changes, career path, things, it starts to unveil. Was that a good choice? Was that not a good choice? It would come to you as you walk through it. Because one of the points of watching and just discerning, does this exist in me and does this not exist in me, is we begin to see that fourth foundation of mindfulness, which is how the phenomena comes. that anger arises and anger passes away, that the fear of that job problem passes away as time changes, that even if you had great lust for someone and think that they're just the greatest thing ever in the whole universe, that the relationship can change and then that can go away. And so the end is always inherent in the beginning, and it's a transformation. And we see that by knowing the simple thing, does this exist in me? Last week, is this pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? How often do we catch neutral? Not very often. How often do we catch unpleasant? More often than pleasant. And so those mindfulness of those states, though, says they're not always the same. It shifts constantly. It moves from one to the other. So the three poisons, rāga, dosa, and moha, they have opposites. And this is what I've come to see in my practice. Your brain can't actually hold the chemistry for these and their opposites. And if you, at the same time, it just does, it can't coexist. I'm speaking very specifically about neuropsychology. The chemistry in your brain, when you're firing about anger, has a really hard time with loving kindness. It simply doesn't want to fire at the same time. When you are fired up with lust, then you have a hard time not being attached, because the chemistry has a hard time existing simultaneously. So their opposites are, the opposites of rāga is non-attachment. The opposite of dosa or anger is loving kindness or metta. And the opposite of moha or confusion is wisdom. And so we can see, like inherent in the beginning is the end, we can also see inherent in these is their opposite. So there is a state that is angry, but you really can overcome anger with loving kindness. I'm really angry at that politician. I really hate that politician and all the things that that politician does that I don't like. Wouldn't it be nice if they were happy for real? Wouldn't it be nice if they were not confused? Gosh, I wish I could do anything I could for that to be true. In that space, you can transform anger into loving kindness. And that is something that we're pointing to with these four foundations of mindfulness. I'm going to share a piece from the Dhammapada. There's no fire like lust. There's no grip like hatred. There is no net like delusion. There's no river like craving. These things govern us, like Chris said. We're at their mercy. And they govern us because we really aren't mindful that we don't catch them as they come. They take us over. If the storm is coming, I'm in Newport right now. The bayfront's behind me, and the gray sky off on the ocean clearly coming my way. And when the storm is coming and you see it, and you know, here it comes, and you know that it passes, then you at least have the ability to know you should get a raincoat and an umbrella or go inside. You should take refuge. There's a way to relinquish that hatred and replace it with loving kindness. It doesn't mean storms don't come. It means that when they do, we go inside. We take refuge. We see the storm for what it is, temporary and not lasting. Does that make sense to everybody so far?
Yep.
Yes.
That's a lot of stuff. We just did one paragraph, and that's
Mhm.
only the first half of the part on mind. I'm going to share the other one, though we probably, I'd rather open it up to discussion, but yeah, let's do that. Let's slow it down. Let's stop here before we make any more confusion, because the next section moves on with this. But I'll say this. The Maha Satipatthana Sutta is kind of like a roller coaster ride. You start going up one breath at a time. Ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk. And then pretty soon that slows down. You're really slowing things down and breaking things down into the four foundations of mindfulness. Like when you reach the top of that place with roller coaster, ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk. And then all of a sudden it shifts downhill, whoosh, and takes all of these things that we're seeing and we move straight into the 5 hindrances, the 7 foundations of enlightenment. We move straight into the jhanas, and we look at the entire thing from start to finish, into the 4 noble truths, understanding the fundamental foundation of the 4 noble truths and why it's so significant. And then we see the 8-fold path where we can say, okay, I've seen this now. I've seen this practice. See how it works. And I can engage this in my life. And I can see it when I go up the stairs. And that really is the magic of this sutta. And we're just right now, where we're at with this is right at the top of the roller coaster ride. We're right at the top. We're almost done. Looking at the 4 foundations. Then we're going to find out what it's all about. So stay tuned next time. Same Buddha channel, same Buddha time. Anybody got any thing that they'd like to add before we conclude for today? I've opened it up to more discussion.
I only wanted to thank you for the teaching on some of the confusion stuff. I say thank you because I think it's given me some more to look at.
Good.
Yeah, that's I'm confused on confusion.
Well, one of the
And
things
that's a go-to for me, much more than anger or any of that. It's like a confusion. But I think for me, it's more, it's like, oh, poor me, I'm confused. It comes that message, oh, poor me, your brain isn't working right, or you don't see it, or you're confused.
Right, I'm doing something wrong. Yeah, that is confusion. Right? Right? I can't tell you guys how many times, and this is something that has occurred to me spontaneously when I've been in despair, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard somebody say that they feel broken, the word broken. And you're not broken. I'll tell you, I looked, you're not broken. And I can say that to everybody looking at all. And we all have that sense sometimes. But one of the things that we start to identify is that's just a sensation. It's just a sense. Maybe maybe this job's not right. This job's not right for me. I should go seek another job. Or this love is not my true love. I've got to go seek another true love. That confusion can just be a sensation we're having that is telling us that something needs to change, or something's going to change, or whatever. That's a natural drive of our biology. You know, it's a natural drive of where we're at, and we see it and we take it as real. And so there's confusion. And then a lot of what we talk about as we move forward is what they say, vacillating doubt. Like, okay, I've seen it and I'm still confused because while I've seen it and I know it doesn't work like that, I still kind of go this way. So vacillating doubt.
How do I deal with it now that I see it?
Yeah.
How do I approach it? Yeah.
It's an interesting thing that when you're talking about confusion, because this came up actually in an earlier conversation today, is that confusion is the beginning of the inquiry, right? It's like when you go, I'm confused, that tells you there's something I need to understand here. And so it's and I think part of it is we live in this society, our current society, the flavor of it is that you can be a rock star at 20. And in fact, to become, just as we were discovering as we were working on the mindfulness, where we're starting with the thread of the breath, and then we're now at the point of understanding, we're now at the point of beginning to see how the mind works, right? So we started with this very it's like, I'm confused. I thought I was going to do meditation and become instantly enlightened.
Yep.
And then you spend like the first several years like, okay, is it just breathing? That's all we're doing? We're just breathing?
Yeah, right.
Like when do we get to this kind of highfalutin metaphysical stuff?
Right.
And and all the time it's like this confusion, and each time we do just a little thing, the thread just keeps pulling it more and more. We get clearer and clearer about what is not only confusing us, but what to do about it.
Yeah. And that's a great place to leave it, because we're getting ready to go there. We're getting ready to talk about what to do about Um, so that's coming up. Yeah. Alina, did you have something you wanted to say? I see.
Well, I had a question, I guess. How
Mhm.
does intuition fit into this framework, if at all?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
How does intuition fit into this framework, if at all? And I mean, often it is the case that we feel a intuitive need to make a change, and it's not confusion to say, hey, this, in your example of a job, isn't working. It's more like clarity that it isn't working.
Yeah. So and that's a good point. Intuition. So let's examine that a little bit, because I haven't really thought about it, honestly. And so I don't know, but let's see. So let's think about what is intuition and where does it come from? So I would say intuition is a feeling. Would you agree? If we look at it like it's something like I have an innate sense that this that something needs to shift. Would you agree that that's a feeling?
I'm
As
actually
com-
sure,
as
but it has feelings attached to it. It has I think it's like a multi-level experience that includes feelings and sensations.
Yeah, it's a sort of a pulls from, I think, when we talk about like when we talk about the meditation practice of Vipassana, right? Insight meditation. Something about insight and intuition are related to each other. Insight might be the more polished version of intuition, and intuition may be a more raw impulse.
That's good. That's a good way to put it. Because for me, when I talk about intuition, and you know what, I'll say, without like driving into something, getting into real metaphysical, like trying to keep things straight where they are. I've met some learned monks who do seem to have some very high functioning mental powers. And so intuition, there's probably a mundane intuition and a super mundane intuition. In that, as you're so where I would be careful is that sometimes I think we can have a sense or feeling that says, I mean, even as you think about, okay, your intuition comes from your conditions. So my experience has been that when the sky looks like this and so on, and the air feels just right, it might rain. So while I'm not reading the weather forecast, I have a sense that I probably ought to prepare for the rain and put on a coat and stuff. And that is informed by my physical and mental perceptions and my feelings. So I think from a Buddhist perspective, we recognize that every single one of those things does not belong to us and is transient. That every single aspect, every single thing that is conditions of things coming together. So we recognize that conditions come together and they break apart. So an intuition is something that's coming together of its parts. We can see that because we've seen its feelings, we've seen that it's thinking, we've seen that it's multi-layered, and there's even super mundane amount of like, I've applied my wisdom and that is informing this. And yet not a single part of that is self. Not a single part of that is permanent and lasting. It is more like my example of the rain, in that the weather's coming and I see it coming and I can prepare for that. So intuition, I suppose, as I examine it, intuition's not the thing, wisdom's the thing. Because I get my intuition might be an itch to go scratch, and my wisdom kind of supersedes that. It knows this is shifting and changing. Sometimes it's the right move, and sometimes it's not the right. But in the end, it's the move. And so he's again and again here saying, recognize that just in and of itself, that this thing exists, that it comes into existence, that it passes away again, that it is made up of parts. And because what we're doing here is not trying to achieve a state of perfection, but rather let go of the things that keep us from a pre-existing state of perfection. So when we look at this deeply, then rather than saying, here is a thing that I have, my intuition, my drive that I should do, we really want to look deeply at how that comes about, I think. That's my examination of it.
Mhm. I think for me, intuition, and it's in a feeling level. I think it's a physical, most often, that at least that I recognize it. It kind of, like Chris was saying earlier, it's one of those things that opens the door for inquiry. You know, why have I got this feeling?
Yeah.
Something doesn't feel right, or something's telling me something and I'm not hearing it, or whatever. And then first comes that feeling. And then I think if I am practicing mindfulness, the next step is for me to look at it, inquire, what is it? And that includes the paying attention to if it comes and goes.
Yeah.
But if it's one of those pits in your tummy that just lasts, something's not right here,
Yeah.
something's not okay, I want to be able to rather jump to conclusion or confusion, which is kind of why one of my jump tos, which also opens the door for inquiry, but not as often as I think. The feeling of I'm something, my body, my mind, whatever is telling me something. And so it's time to look at it and see if I can sort it out or not. That's seems like it's that steps for me.
That makes sense. That all makes sense to me. Nuanced stuff. We're all, I mean, it's looking deeply, you know, it's like, it's not just taking it at its face value, but you know, it doesn't, sometimes, I mean, of course, intuition, the reason why we honor it is because we recognize that there's a thing happening in our mental and physical capacity that we don't always recognize, right? That we don't always see straight. And so it's like, I just got a bad feeling about this, right? I got a bad feeling about this. And then you can examine, why do I have a bad feeling about this? And then sometimes there's good reasons and sometimes there's not. You know, sometimes it's just a bad feeling. It's like, oh, I don't know, it's spooky outside at night, you know? So how does that sit with you, Alina? How does that, I mean, that's a lot of discussion, but.
All of that I can relate to. I think there are definitely categories within intuition, and parts are like probability gauges from our body, being like based on situations I've been in before. And then sometimes like it is more super mundane. And I'm curious on your take on the super mundane. Like as one random example that just popped into my head. As you know, I was at a yoga retreat in Hawaii recently, and I was like surprised with a medical need that I wasn't expecting, minor. And I just had this idea popped into my mind, go talk to this person. And this person had the thing I needed. And it's like, how did I know to talk to this person who I didn't know? Then that they had the thing I needed. You know, it's like kind of like information coming in and ringing some kind of bell that feels like it's on the border between you and like the big everything, you know, rather than something that is like specifically an emotion or a sensation. And I just feel like maybe intuition deserves its own discourse almost, like because
Well, no, I think that it fits right in with the stuff that we're talking about, actually, because the discussion continues and it's going well. I'm going to go back to not that. Hold on. I'm going to share. Okay, so let's look at this second paragraph on the mind that I wasn't going to talk about, but here. When the mind is restricted, he discerns that the mind is restricted. When the mind is scattered, he discerns that the mind is scattered. When the mind is enlarged, he discerns that the mind is enlarged. When the mind is not enlarged, he discerns that the mind is not enlarged. When the mind is surpassed, he discerns that the mind is surpassed. When the mind is unsurpassed, he discerns the mind is unsurpassed. When the mind is concentrated, he discerns the mind is concentrated. When the mind is not concentrated, he discerns the mind is not concentrated. When the mind is released, he discerns that the mind is released. When the mind is not released, he discerns that the mind is not released. And like all other sections, in this way, he remains focused internally of the mind in and of itself. On the mind, just on the mind, he's saying, where it remains focused on the phenomena and how things shift and change in the mind. They rise and they pass away. Or his mindfulness that there is a mind is maintained to the extent and knowledge and remembrance, and he remains independent, unsustained, not clinging to anything in the world. So the reason why I bring that back into the fold is to say, so here he clearly points to, we start with rāga, dosa, moha, and then we start to see that if those are poisons of the mind, what's the mind like when it's not poisoned? And when you start talking about intuition, when you start talking about some of these things that are super mundane, you're talking about the non-poison state, the state of consciousness that we're striving for here, which is clear and perceives really well. I'll certainly say there are so many times when I've had things going on in my life, or not even, and I've sat, and once my mind was really still, like the answer just popped in, like just like as if it was matter of fact from the start. Sometimes, and that's part of what you're pointing to with that intuition. So if your mind is not scattered and it's open and it's expansive, and you have not filled it with maha, roja, and doka, or dosa and moha, if you have not filled it with poison and it is clear, then it's gonna operate outside of that normal framework, right? That we're talking about when we're constantly driven by stuff. So looking at things like that, I tend to just want to continue to slice them down until I can see their most fundamental, where they fit into this experience of 4 foundations of mindfulness, and then appreciate how they might shift and change. So if I get the intuition that it's going to rain and I should wear a coat, then I can accept that it might shift and change and get sunny, but I'd still be glad I had a coat. So I'd probably follow my intuition. Yeah.
I love that. That's actually very helpful. Basically, what you're talking about is removing the poisons the clear mind perceives and intuits information without. It's actually very consistent with another experience I had at that retreat where I was trying to, like, I had an insight that I was like a lot, like this inability at certain points to be radically honest with myself about the truth of a situation was like this major hindrance. And then in this framework, this fits well with like, why do we sometimes not want to be honest with ourselves about the truth of a situation? Well, there's some rāga.
That's moha, that's delusion
Moha.
and confusion.
Well, it's moha plus rāga, I think, and maybe some dosa to some things you might need to do as a consequence of that.
So there it is. Yeah, there you go.
It does add up to those parts. Like, what is this thing that if you could clear it away, and it has emotions attached to it as well. Anyway, that's very interesting. But the thing underneath that, I think, can come through is like a very clear intuition that feels clean of those things.
Informed by wisdom
Yeah.
and non-attachment, right? Like the opposites of the poison.
Yeah.
So there I could say, so part of what we're going to talk about, and really I love the lively discussion. This has been great, you guys, and I want to keep going, but let's sit on some of these ideas until next week. But what we're getting ready to identify is how the defilements come down. And we look at this statement of maha, rāga, and dosa, and we see that, like, okay, so those poisons can exist in me, but I also can exist in a state without them. And so there is a way to kind of shift that flow and inform your intuition in a way that's informed with the opposites of those poisons. So you're informed with wisdom, you're informed with loving kindness, and you're informed with non-attachment. And so that is that is the top of the roller coaster, my friends. We're going to take a deep dive coming next week. So for now, I'll conclude with that and just say one more time, Nama Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Sama Sambuddhassa. Anybody wants to stick around and visit a little bit more, Lena, I'd love to catch up with you here about your trip. Feel free to stick around. I'm going to share the conclusion of our service presentation here. If I can find it, bear with me.
If you need, I have it handy.
Oh, if you have it handy, yeah, we could go ahead and do that. I closed it so I could open these other things. So if you have it handy, yeah, let Chris.
It's right around my desktop somewhere.
All right. Yeah, I know what you mean.
While you're pulling it up, I want to thank Vicky for her share.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for listening. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that. Like I say, this too often these things get to be like LP Chali's. You know, he says, you know, he calls these things a talk show. We were at a retreat one time, and there was this monk giving a long dissertation, and he walked in and he just shook his head. He's a talk show and walked out. And so he's really anti that. So I really would rather this was group discussion than talk show because we get deeper into the subjects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works for me to get deeper. Yep.
All right. Together, we'll reflect on universal well-being. May we abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may we maintain well-being in ourselves. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, such acts they will be the heirs. And we'll conclude with the salutation to the Triple Gem. Araham Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. Sawakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammam Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sangham Namami. Thanks again for joining me for practice.
Thank you.
Glad to see you guys, and we will see you next time.